Olá.
Olá, bom dia. Hi.
Oi. Bom dia, pessoal. Sejam bem-vindos ao webinário. Nós intitulamos de Design para integração de catadores informais nas cadeias de valor de serviço e serviço de indústria de recursos recicláveis. Bom, eu me chamo Maiara, sou coordenadora de projetos aqui na Giral e estou coordenando esse novo projeto de webinários que estamos lançando hoje em alto nível. Bom, esse é o primeiro webinário de uma série de webinários que a Giral pretende realizar. E esse ano estamos programando mais dois, um que vai começar em setembro, um que vai ser em setembro e outro em dezembro. E os temas e convidados ainda estão em definição. Então, fiquem ligados aí nas nossas redes sociais, que qualquer novidade vão estar ali, tá bom? Bom, a Giral, para quem ainda não conhece, é uma consultoria que trabalha com projetos sociais e socioambientais de alto impacto. Hoje ela é dividida em três núcleos, desculpa. Um é inteligência de recursos, outro é governança intersetorial e outro é negócios de impacto. Esse webinário de hoje, ele é realizado pelo núcleo de inteligência de recursos, que atua fazendo desenvolvimento, planejamento, monitoramento e gestão de sistemas inclusivos de coleta seletiva e logística reversa. A gente também dá suporte e gestão de organizações sociais, em especial cooperativas de catadores de materiais recicláveis. Informações de ordens práticas desse webinário. Primeiro, ele vai ser ministrado em inglês, como tínhamos colocado só um pouquinho, gente. Tá. Bem, o webinário ele vai ser ministrado em inglês, como a gente já tinha divulgado, né? Segundo, as perguntas elas vão ser respondidas só ao final do webinário. Então, tudo que vocês tiverem de perguntas, por favor, coloquem lá no chat, que a gente vai reunir tudo e fazer as perguntas. Pode ser em inglês ou português, tá bom? Aí a gente traduz. Terceiro, se vocês quiserem fazer a pergunta diretamente para a Anne, vocês avisem também no chat, que aí a gente providencia essa conferência, tá bom? Afinal, e no momento mais oportuno para isso. Anne, first of all, thank you so much for this webinar. Now, feel free for introduce yourself and the webinar. Please accept my invitation here. Anne.
Thank you. Can you understand me? Somebody say something because you're all muted. So I am, let me go back. I'm going to talk to you about informal integration and maybe what are the next steps after the progress that has been made in Brazil with organizing informal recyclers. I'd like to hear who is here, who is in the webinar. So maybe you can unmute yourself and tell me. Hello? Can somebody say something, please? Okay, I don't hear anything, so I will just go on. Natalia, maybe you can confirm to me by WhatsApp that you are hearing and understanding. So we are talking about informal integration. Brazil is one of many, maybe dozens of emerging economies where the informal sector has become important, especially because there is a big drive to modernize waste management. For example, the Brazil solid waste law is an effort to modernize waste management. there's also quite a lot of experience, much of it project-based, but not in Brazil primarily, that focuses on what we call social or technical integration. And I'm going to explain that just a little bit. Social integration is when waste pickers are allowed to join the healthcare system or to get some help with identity cards or things in the social sphere that help them in their lives but are not related to their profession as informal recyclers. Technical integration is something like what the South African packaging organization is proposing, that in every city the packages all get collected by the industry. They come to a big building, like some of the buildings where your cooperatives are, and waste pickers or people who used to be informal recyclers get to sort out the recyclables, and then the producers get to sell them to the industry. And the informal recyclers either get paid for their labor, or in some cases, they get to sell the recyclables directly. The key to these two things is they don't change the system at its base, and they don't really change the way the institutions relate to informal recyclers or the way they relate to recycling in general. And so in this presentation, I put a few slides together to talk about what could be effective to really get a place for informal entrepreneurs in municipal recycling systems at the time they are being modernized. It's not so different from the refugee question in Europe. People want to say, okay, refugees can come to Europe if they conform to European values and religion, and if they learn to behave in a civilized way, in the way Europeans define civilization. But some countries also understand that they have to change themselves to make a place for the refugees and the immigrants. And other countries say all the changing has to be on the side of the refugees. We don't have to do anything. We're perfect the way we are. If they do it our way, they can come. And that model of informal integration, that if the informal sector people do it the way the municipalities think they should, I call formalization. It's a one-sided process. It means that the informal sector makes all the sacrifices. They don't get to say exactly what they want, and the prize is they get accepted. But I see that a real structural change has to be more two-sided change. All the institutions have to change, and they all have to adjust to the needs of each other. And if they do that, I believe that they can get very high recycling rates and create what I would call self-correcting systems, virtuous circles. Anybody who would like me to talk slower or like to ask a question, please put it in the chat. So I'm going to start with something I innovated with some help from people like Jeroen, who is here in the webinar also, and talk about some things about informal recycling on the analytic level. And what are dilemmas or issues? What are difficult questions to answer when you talk about integrating the informal sector? And what kind of system changes facilitate that? And then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeroen, who is sitting, if I am not mistaken, in Manaus. And Jeroen will show you on his screen a particular innovation that he and I and some other people developed to improve the process of informal integration in Colombia, one of your neighbors. And then I might finish with some advice to decision makers, or we might finish with Jeroen. So some of the things that come up for me is there are lots of initiatives on informal recycling, and some of the first and some of the best have been in Brazil, but we don't always know how to say if they're a success or not, and for whom. For example, we've looked a few times at recycling in Belo Horizonte, in Minas Gerais. Excuse me for how I pronounce it. The integration part looks successful, but nobody can say if the recycling part is really a big success, or even what they mean by recycling, and which kinds of waste are included, and which parts of the system they should really be measuring. And I know the Superintendencia in Belo Horizonte is quite interested in doing things in a different way. But in many places, if you say, let's change the game, let's put recycling in the middle instead of dump sites and landfills, the industry people will say, wait a minute, you're living in a fantasy world, or are you crazy? So another question is, what is this all going to look like in 50 years? I'm a pretty old person, so I don't expect to be around. But Natalia, for example, is a pretty young person. And I guess, and probably some of the other ones of you at Giral are quite young, maybe under 30, maybe under 35. In 50 years, you might still be around. What is a circular economy? What is recycling then? And then moving back to the present, if we want to change the position of informal recyclers, how do we think about that? How do they want their position to be different? And what are the conflicts of interest? And what has to be done to kind of arrive at a joint course of action from many different stakeholders, including Giral? This is what I call a recycling framework. I have gotten some criticism, so if you don't like this diagram, you're not alone. Other people also don't like it. On this side, can you see my pointer? I hope so. This is what I call the municipal sphere of influence. We also call it the service chain. That means the institutions and people on this side are working for the services they provide. They're usually paid by the hour, and they're usually removing waste, and what they're creating is cleanliness. I sometimes say somebody who works in waste collection is being paid for the clean, empty space they leave behind them. It's not the same as this side. This is the value chain sphere of influence, and this side is mostly private sector. This side is mostly public sector or under the influence of the public sector. Here you have a whole bunch of private industries and private companies. You have the end users. That's companies that either make the product or make the packages that go to the product. So someone who makes a product is somebody who's making paper for printing or paper for newspaper or one of those big black polyethylene water tanks or something that people buy. And they are buying recycled materials to put into those products. We call those, in US language, we call those the end users. In Europe, they call them the recyclers, which gets everybody a little bit confused. The people who sell to the end users, they're the processors. What that means is they get materials that are separated but not yet industrial quality, and they understand the market, these guys, and their job is to convert the recyclables into industrial inputs. Sometimes we call them industrial feedstocks, so that they meet the specifications of the industry. And I'll come back to that a little later because part of this presentation is also about when this part of the market fails. Here you have a very important level of the private value chain. This is called, in some places, a junk shop or a recycling shop or a scrap shop. In Colombia, they call it a bodega, but I already know that's not a good word to use in Brazil. It means something different. And these are the people who do something very, very important. They buy from the waste pickers. They buy from the ambulant collectors. They also buy sometimes from households and sometimes also from the municipalities. And what's key about them is they buy for cash. And they buy in small quantities and they pay low prices. And that's not because they're bad people or they want to exploit the waste pickers. It's because they have to pay a lot out before they get paid back. Now, this transaction is in cash. If let's say, if Jeroen is the waste picker and he comes here and sells to Mayada, who is operating a junk shop, he has to pay him right away in cash. Otherwise, tomorrow he won't come back. In most cases. Sometimes when the cooperatives are in this position, it doesn't work exactly like that. But this guy, or Mayada, or whoever it is, when they sell, in order to sell to this person, first of all, they have to accumulate enough to fill a truck. Then they have to bale it, or shred it, or chip it, or somehow make it more dense and easier to transport. Otherwise, they are paying for transporting air, and that's not very handy because you don't get paid for the air. And when they get it to here, these guys say, thank you very much. You brought us 25 tons. We'll tell you in a week how many of those tons we accept. And a week later, they say, thank you very much. You gave us 25 tons. 19 of them are okay. 3 of them are not so good, but we'll still accept them, only we won't pay you anything for them, but at least you don't have to take them back. And the other 3, well, we're going to throw those away, or you can take them back if you don't agree with us. And by the way, for those 19 tons, if today is June 21st, we promise that you'll get your money no later than the end of September. Now, if you're sitting here, you say, great, I have a transaction, but you don't have any money for 3 months. If you're lucky, sometimes it's even longer. So what do you have to do? You might have to borrow money to keep paying Jeroen and all his colleagues who are coming in. And therefore, you can't pay him a very good price, because from those 19 tons, you have to earn back a lot in order to cover the cost of your money, the cost of what they didn't pay, what they took but wouldn't pay for, the cost of what they didn't take at all. And so there's a big price differential between here and here. Because when you sell here, you get a higher price, but you have to wait a long time for it. And we all know that time is money, right? So that's a little bit about junk shops. Here you have where the informal sector is. You have what are called itinerant or ambulant waste buyers. I understand in Brazil, you also have these kind of collectors who collect certain kinds of construction and demolition waste in horse carts. Have I got that right, Jeroen? And here, these are the waste pickers. They're part of this chain, but they're not completely in it. There's a little distance here. And one of the things in these other systems I'm going to show you diagrammed this way is what happens to the waste picker in different kinds of integration scenarios. Here's the next one. This is the way recycling works in the Netherlands or in California or in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, or in some ways in Sweden. It's a rich country model of modern recycling. What do you notice here? The service chain is very fat. It's gotten much broader, and it's pretty much driven the value chain almost out of business. This is a simplification, but all those intermediate guys, so the processor and the junk shop, they're not really around. Maybe they're there a little bit. And you have a new color here. You have two of these things that I've made six-sided. And these are what I call hybrid institutions. You see they're sitting partly in the service chain and partly in the value chain sphere of influence. So a buyback center is where very small suppliers can go, like to an NGO. These are often NGOs, and bring materials and maybe get a very little bit of money, or they get a coupon to ride on the bus or to go to the movies. It's a reward rather than a payment. Here you have another kind of hybrid institution called a materials recovery facility. And I was involved in inventing these in North America starting in about 1986, which gives you a little idea of why I call myself the grandmother of these kind of processes. A materials recovery facility is receiving material from separate recyclables collection. So from, for example, all drink packages, or from all rigid food containers, whether they're made of plastic or metal or glass, or all dry recyclables except glass. In English, we call this over here, we call these commingled recyclables. It means it's a designed mixture. it's not mixed waste, but it's also not viable. The paper industry won't buy it because there are plastic bottles in it. The packaging industry won't take responsibility for it because there could also be like plastic lawn furniture or children's blocks or other things that are recyclable but that aren't packaging. And an MRF usually has a very simple sorting line where workers make a sort of the recyclables. But it's not very dirty work because the recyclables have been separated at source, and ideally there isn't any waste in the recyclables. And the MRF sells these materials to the end user, or sometimes even directly beyond the end user to the producer of the packages. When I was working in the US, in the aluminium can value chain, we had something that was called batch tolling, where Alcoa, the company that actually made the can, wrote on the can, this can is the property of Alcoa Aluminum. So all the people who all the companies that put sparkling drinks into those cans were only borrowing the aluminum from the owner. And when they sold the drinks to the consumer wasn't also owning the can. They were only buying the drink, and technically speaking, the can still belonged to Alcoa Aluminum. And that's one way that's one of the things that comes out of this when the service chain kind of really is interested in minimizing what goes to disposal. So I'm just going to see if I have some other diagrams that we can show first. This is just one, this is a famous place in informal recycling. There's a place called Pune, India. And here you see that they have a model for recycling where the waste pickers get to be in the middle. And there are a lot of, there are two kinds of junk shops. One actually belongs to the waste pickers cooperative, like some of them in Brazil, and one is private. And the waste pickers are actually formally part of the service chain because they're doing door-to-door collection. They're selling or giving organic waste to make biogas for street lights. They have their own storage sheds, and they sell to cooperating junk shops. This is one model of where you can go with informal integration. The producers aren't here yet. We'll see these in another slide. But now I'm going to go back to some of the intermediate slides. Some of these things you know already. So I'll start with, when we talk about what's the future for informal integration, you get a lot of what do you call protest questions. These are not neutral questions. They're questions from people who really don't believe that the informal recycling sector should continue to exist. But answering them in a serious way is part of the game if we want to increase the space for independent recycling. People say, should formal institutions encourage dirty and dangerous work? Well, one way or another saying of this is, how do we get these people off of our landfill? Now, my answer to that is usually, if you were doing your work better, the recyclables would never be at your landfill. And so you wouldn't, the informal recyclers would have nothing to do there. They'd be collecting the recyclables at source or from MRF So you're the ones who make the landfills dirty and dangerous, not the informal recyclers. And some people say, aren't these people really stealing resources that belong to municipalities or to producers? Or how can we have a conversation with illiterate people who have no representatives? What I like, and I guess it would make people in Brazil laugh a little bit, is to say waste pickers can't talk for themselves. They need an NGO to talk for them. In my experience, NGOs don't usually understand very well what informal recyclers are doing, but that's maybe another story. So then you get questions about representativity. How can we organize? And basically organize means find someone we can talk to who can talk on behalf of them. Brazilian Catadores are pretty well organized in this sense. But then, and so that's in Brazil, that's not so hard to answer. But then comes what I call the help question. Shouldn't we choose how to help them rather than doing what they think? How can we trust them to know what's good for them? These are all sort of patronizing or colonialistic questions, and they sometimes get in the way. Another thing that gets in the way, in my opinion, is projects. I have become, in the last couple of years, very negative about project-based informal integration, because a lot of times the point of departure is waste pickers are poor victims. Any kind of help is an improvement. But that's not always so, because help with housing or certain kinds of price support can actually leave waste pickers worse off than they are before the help starts, because you disturb quite complex and well-functioning systems where much of what's happening is below the surface. So somebody who flies in and takes a look and says, these people need gloves and boots, maybe doesn't understand that gloves and boots are very hot, or that with gloves you can't sort things, and that if your interest is in improving working conditions, you shouldn't fill it in for the waste pickers. We made a film about waste pickers a few years ago, what they wanted to say to producers. And the Indian waste pickers in Pune, there was one of them said, hey, we're adults. If we need gloves, just pay us enough for the materials, and we'll go out and buy the gloves that we want, thank you very much. So over-designing help is often a characteristic project. Next thing, projects are risky. Waste pickers lose equilibrium, and sometimes they lose income. And sometimes projects also create competition because the municipality understands better that recyclers are something they can sell. And then somebody gets the idea, oh, the recyclables belong to us, we're the municipality. And then you're in a whole different situation. And what waste pickers often tell you is, we want normal rights and social protection, like others doing the same work. We don't want to be exceptions. We don't want to be objects of a project. We want to be recognized, we want to be paid, and I sometimes say, we want to be subjects, not objects. We want to be the starting of the sentence, not the end of it. The recognition of their occupation is key, and I say, I like to work with the Hippocratic Oath. For those of you who know what this is, you might be laughing now, but this is an old thing that all doctors still have to do when they get their license to practice medicine. They have to swear an oath that by becoming a doctor, they agree to do no harm, or that the cure will not be worse than the disease if they can help it. And I say if a project comes along, you can kind of check whether the project matches the principle of the Hippocratic Oath. Does it look like the chance of doing harm is small enough that it's worth accepting the risk? Let's see what the next slide is. Sometimes integration fails in projects because to write proposals, you have to make a lot of assumptions, and often they don't match the reality. I used to support a lot of city twinnings between Dutch cities and cities in countries like Brazil and Nicaragua and South Africa and India. And the Dutch people always assumed that if there was any recycling, it was happening in the municipality. So they would go to some place like, let's just say, Nicaragua or Honduras, and say to and have a big long conversation with the mayor about garbage trucks and dump sites, and then they would say, oh, and by the way, what are you doing about recycling? And the mayor, you can't see me, but he would like put his hands over his mouth and go, oh, I'm not doing anything about recycling. But the mayor doesn't know, or sometimes doesn't know, that there are thousands of people in his or her municipality who are doing recycling, but the municipality isn't doing it. So that's an assumption that makes a lot of projects not connect to the reality. Another one is trust is gained slowly, and by then the project is over. Another one is that, in my experience, I'm a middle-class person. I was born in Boston. I grew up in New York State. I hang out with a lot of Europeans. I emigrated to Europe. I'm a middle-class person in Europe also. And one of the things that I have come to understand is that middle-class eyes need to be educated. And when they first go into a cooperative or a dump site, or even with somebody on a roof, all they see is the disadvantage and the dirt. And they can't understand what they're seeing. They just understand that it looks horrible to them, and they wouldn't like to do it themselves. And they make a whole bunch of assumptions that start from the point of departure that this is awful work and these people need help to get out of that work. Well, those of you who work for Giral and in this field know pretty well that one of the last things that many informal recyclers want is to go do other work, because it's dirty work, it's hard work, it takes knowledge, but it often pays pretty reasonably. And in Botswana, a very small country, but in income level similar to Brazil, I talked to a woman on a dump site, a permitted waste picker on a dump site. And she said to me, well, first I started to ask her why she was picking up the dirty, smashed PET 2-liter bottle instead of the clean, unsmashed one. And she said, I can get more in the sack and then I get more money. And then she said, you know how much I make? I don't even tell my family how much I make doing this work. Why would I go to work in a shop where I would have to listen to the boss, where I would get paid a quarter of what I get paid here? This is just, here I'm my own boss, I can do what I want. So she's a good example of many people in recycling who don't really want to do anything else. But probably you already know that. Another thing about projects is they don't understand this part about the income, so that income replacement doesn't usually get written into the project. And the other kinds of gains that you can make in projects either take longer than most projects operate, or they're not sustainable in the sense that the project can't manage to get them into the law or into contracts. And the enabling by the institutions are not usually going to change as a result of the project. There are some exceptions. GIZ and the World Bank are both donor organizations whose projects often lead to structural change. But in general, this explains why I'm not, when somebody comes and says, oh, we have a project on informal integration, or, oh, we have a project on city twinning, we're going to help those people in our sister cities. And we say, the first thing that happens is my heart sinks. And I think, oh my God, because there's a high risk that they're going to end up doing more harm than good. Maybe you think I'm cynical? Well, maybe. So, I guess I would ask you via the chat to tell me, do you know a lot about recycling in India, about KKPKP, the Waste Pickers Union in India, or shall I show something to you about it? Because this is an old effort in integration. It affects 10,000 women waste pickers in a small city for India. A small city for India has about a population of the same as New York City. It's about 8 million. And they started already in 1981, in about 2001, maybe even before. They have a very good website, actually two. One for KKPKP, which is the trade union, the syndicate, and the other for Swatch, which is the operational cooperative. And they started working with the Pune Municipal Council in the end of the 1990s, and they have a very good cooperation. The waste pickers continue with more skills, better legal protection, and dignity and recognition. They also started to provide a new service, house-on-house collection, door-to-door collection, and they get some service payments in addition to the income from selling the materials. They're protected from the police. Their rights are anchored in a contract, and they have from the municipality the same legal rights as other workers, even though they're self-employed workers, or they're employed by the cooperative. For example, their children can have the same scholarship as the children of the other kinds of people who work, who are considered formal workers. And there are projects and some outside support that have helped them pay for physical improvements to the system. But the waste pickers also pay a fee to their union, and they pay a percentage of what they earn to the co-op. Anyway, we saw Pune before. Some of what's interesting is they have storage sheds, that's infrastructure. They collect wet and dry door to door, and the wet waste they give to the city light company to make biogas for the street lights, and the residue goes to landfill or incinerators. The dry waste they sort themselves by hand or with very little mechanical help. And some of the wet waste goes directly from households to on-site compost in housing estates. The same kind of housing estates that you have in Brazil, where middle class or upper class people live like behind a gate with their own playgrounds for the children and laundry facilities. In India, all those places also have a compost, and it's a clever one because it's like divided in 8 compartments, and the first compartment is called Monday, and the second one is called Tuesday, and the third one is called Wednesday. And so the waste pickers do a rotation just by putting the wet waste, the house-on-house organic waste into the thing for that day, and then it builds a kind of a processing in. So another form of integration is via producers. That is companies like Procter & Gamble or automobile or computer companies or companies that make fruit, that package fruit juice or Coca-Cola or other kinds of drinks. And they are under pressure to take back their products and packages and ensure they are recycled or manage their end of life. This is usually something that's done via a law. In Brazil, you still have, I think, the CEMPRE Brazil. CEMPRE Brazil is technically called a product stewardship, a PS system, because it's not, or it wasn't at the time it was formed, the subject of a law. The producers could decide to form their own association and organize the take-back the way they wanted to. The value of these systems is very variable. In Colombia, CEMPRE Columbia had a very strong role in getting the waste picker decree passed, and they were very active in facilitating different kinds of sectorial accords and agreements and other people doing things, but they actually didn't do anything themselves in a practical way. Other producers, in Costa Rica, Jeroen was involved with a kind of a product stewardship initiative for electronic waste that was supposed to produce an EPR system, but the ministries spent so long arguing with each other that the producers just put the system in place and started operating it without waiting for the government. And these systems often drive recycling development, but sometimes they just drive making disposal more confused and more expensive. So my message about these systems is be sure you understand how the materials are moving and how the money is moving before you figure out what the role of the informal recyclers and the cooperatives can be in these systems. What I can tell you, because I wrote a chapter of the OECD guide for EPR that came out last year, was that the tools for EPR and PS look different in countries like Brazil than they do in countries like Germany, because there's less money in the system, and this is useful for waste pickers and informal recyclers and cooperatives because they're needed more. The work that they do is actually needed more. And you can ask me later for that chapter if you want. I'm sorry, like so many of the things I write, it's in English, but that's just the way it is. EPR in Colombia made a big difference in terms of occupational recognition, legalization, and is actually demanding organizing. And it's not totally clear how that's going to work. But they're not ideal because, in some sense, they put the government outside. So here's a system that probably nobody of you have ever seen before in Botswana. Botswana is a very small country. Almost all of it is in the Kalahari Desert. There are a whole bunch of places where they're not even municipalities. They're just what are called tribal lands. And there are about 100 times more cattle than people. But they're close to South Africa, and they're a progressive country with a pretty active environmental ministry. And so they kind of get to ride along with some of the South African EPR and PS initiatives. What you see here is that the service chain is very big, and the value chain is also very big. And they're overlapping. Botswana has the best system of authorized landfill pickers that I ever saw. Basically, the formal private recycling buyer has the right to put 5 to 10 waste pickers on the landfill and is responsible for them and has to buy them uniforms and has to ensure that they have medical care and that they wear protective equipment. And in some cases, they employ these people, and in some cases, they just guarantee to buy everything that people pull out of the landfill. They transport it, and here, and in turn, the district landfills, they authorize the landfill pickers via the formal recycling buyers, and the materials go to the processors, they go to the exporters, mostly to South Africa, and there they go to the end user industries. But there are some other actors in the system. Here you have a new color, blue, in the middle. And ArcelorMittal is a steel company. And ArcelorMittal has created an entire sphere of influence around steel beverage cans. That's and steel, like vegetable and other kinds of food cans. And they sponsor collection events, and they support the price. They guarantee that everybody who sells steel cans get a reasonable price for them. And then schools collect and waste pickers collect. And they really stimulate the collection by supporting the price. Sounds great, but what do they do with them? I couldn't meet one single person in Botswana who actually knew where those cans went until I talked to the official agent of ArcelorMittal. And Botswana is a country where there's a lot of copper mining, also a lot of diamond mines. But it turns out that all those steel cans are baled and taken to the copper mine and actually burned in order to remove impurities from the copper. I don't understand the metallurgy of this, but it was really interesting because everybody said those cans are recycled, Nobody knew how, and in fact, the truth is somewhere in between. There are some things, but if you call that recycling, I'm not sure. But what's interesting about this system is that waste pickers are better off because this particular complex, this steel recycling system, has created a market, a better market for a material that's otherwise low value. And ArcelorMittal is better off because it can tell its shareholders that they are recovering 90 or 95% of the cans that they put on the market. Are you following this? I'll look for a few chats coming back. Is this kind of what you wanted me to talk about? Okay, let's go to the next. Another form of integration is what's called business-to-business partnership. I'm also going to say to Jeroen, maybe get ready for the live demonstration. I'm planning to stop within about 5 minutes, and then there'll be some time before the questions for you to demonstrate RIP. So in business-to-business initiatives, I actually had a meeting last week with Danone, a big producer of yogurt and a big seller of water. And I was actually talking to that person in Mexico, but they're very interested in Brazil as well. It's one of their big markets. And when I talk to producers, one of the things I say is, waste pickers are business people like you. Don't rely on the government to get between you. You actually have a better ability to understand them, and they a better ability to understand you than governments have. And if governments start getting in the middle of your relationship, everybody's going to be confused and frustrated. That's not to say I'm not a right-wing politician or a European-style liberal who wants business to solve everything. But in fact, I really see informal recycling as a business activity. And I've noticed that governments are not very good business agents. And above all, they don't know shit about selling things. Governments are just not in the selling business. And so in countries like Brazil, if they don't first invest in a lot of knowledge about how the value chain works, government recycling initiatives tend not to be very successful. The second thing about business-to-business initiatives and most EPR integration is that the waste pickers need to legalize themselves somehow. And that often depends on the spaces for legalization. Remember, we talked about the immigrants in Europe. Immigrants in Europe or the refugees, they can't integrate if it's all on their side. So the EPR and PS systems, or the businesses that want to work with the informal sector, they need to carve out a way of working with them. One of the best projects I ever seen, talking about projects, or ever heard about, and I think Jeroen knows more about this, was a project that was done by German cooperation, GIZ, with Gerdau Steel in Mexico, where Gerdau, the big buyer, was supported by GIZ to take an initiative that was called Strengthening Our Value Chains and Making Our Value Chain Relationships Fairer. And there, the donor was supporting a business-to-business initiative. So that was pretty interesting. And when you're thinking about integration, don't forget the business sector might be the best place to start. You also, when you do this, you need to think of inclusivity really broadly. Okay, I also understand that Gerdau was also replicated in a lot of other countries. So I was right, Jeroen knows more about it in the question time, you can ask him the questions about it, not me. When you have business-to-business initiatives, there are two parts of institutionalization that you have to pay attention to that the businesses can't manage themselves. One is that in parallel, you have to anchor the gains in public policy and in legislation. So, for example, the legalization, you have to draw a line through the legislation part and make sure that the laws allow and actually promote legalization. And the second thing is you need at ministerial or a legal level the occupations of informal recyclers. I usually talk about 10 different occupations, some of which you don't find in Brazil, but only in Europe, some the other way around. That these have to have an official status. So this is a photo that I took out our window in Colombia when Jeroen and I were working on GRIP with our other partner. This is one of the cooperatives in a very small city in Colombia called Cajica. This is another form of integration. This is in Manila. Here, again, you have integration where the service chain and the value chain pretty much stay the way they are, but you have some new lines of transactions, and you have a new institution called a designated MRF. This is different than in the US. There, they take a junk shop, it was green, it was this shape, and they say, if you make a few changes and follow some occupational standards and report your tonnages to us, we'll call you a MRF. And not only that, because we require that every barangay or village or district has to have its own MRF, you also will get a kind of zonal monopoly. And so this is an interesting integration model at the level of the junk shop. Also, on the landfills, there are authorized waste pickers, and they have waste picking in the agricultural value chain. And the municipality collects organics for compost at the MRF, and the informal organic sector collects food waste, what you call in English swill, or in the Philippines they call it pig slop, and they sell it to swine farms for feeding swine. This works very badly in Muslim countries, but in countries like Brazil, where people appreciate the value of pork, it's an interesting thing to add to the discussion. So this is, I think, going to be just about my last slide. One thing that really helps informal integration is what I call analyzing market failures. Market failures are not unpredictable. Generally, when there's a problem in the recycling market, it's one of these three. There are some other ones, but these are the most common. And some of the most important gains to be made in informal integration or inclusive recycling involve fixing these market failures, bringing new money into the system, and connecting waste pickers with those new income potential niches at the same time that you legally restrict their axis of motion in the areas they've been working in. So it's kind of a way to sweeten the legalization process, which sometimes is not economically beneficial. So these are three. The first one is a wine glass model of market failure. You see it, for example, in Ghana, in Accra, one of the dirtiest cities I've ever been to, and believe me, I've been to a lot. There's a very large amount of plastics in the water, in the ditches, in the land. There's a very big plastic industry and a lot of demand also from China. But the systems for collection and storage, transport and processing and reporting aren't there. A wine glass market failure is a good news market failure. It's much easier to create the processing system than it is to create the market. Then you have a flooded market. This is actually a bad news market failure. It means there's a really big supply. The demand is low. The standards for the demand are also high, and there's a lot of competition to serve that demand. And in this situation, you have crashing prices. This is a hard one to fix. You can do something by what's called recycled content legislation. In the US in the 1980s, a bunch of the most populous northeastern states got together and told their newspapers that it was finished with them unless they started buying newsprint that had a high recycled paper content. And that produced a really big shift in the plans of the North American paper industry, whether they were going to make paper from trees or make paper from bales of used paper. Up and down cycling, upcycling is something that they're starting to do in Pune. They're putting waste picker recycled HDPE flakes into 3D printers and making products with them that are both fully recyclable and of a higher value than the source of the plastic. And downcycling, this is something you may be familiar with, where you make like planks and poles that are usually black or brown out of mixed flexible and rigid plastic. This is a hard one, mostly. One other thing that helps is having a storage buffer so that the cooperatives or the junk shops or anybody in the market can wait 2 years until the market gets better. That's often how long it takes. This is also a good news problem. This is a supply-demand mismatch. This is one of the reasons that textiles are not recycled very much in Europe. You have pretty good, healthy supply and demand, but a lot of conflict between buyers and sellers. Part of this market in Europe is in hands of the mafia, and they don't like very much to do business with people who aren't their friends. There aren't any clear standards. European governments, national governments which have laws about recycling just about everything else, kind of leave textiles out because there are a lot of charities who say, we don't want you to regulate this sector because we earn our money from it. So it's a very fragmented and confused sector. There aren't very many associations or cooperatives. It gets, and so a lot of textiles just aren't marketable. This is exactly where I wanted to be now. Jeroen is going to tell you about Columbia, which we now call GRIP, the Global Recycling Information Platform, and he's going to give you a live demonstration. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn off my screen now, and then I'll just join the conference as the rest of you. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Anne. Now we have, for a moment, a gente tem por um momento o Jeroen, que vai apresentar para a gente. Jeroen, você tem uma apresentação?
Ele está mostrando.
Ai, cadê ele?
Acho que é o V1.
Jeroen? Hello, Jeroen? Oi, você tem uma apresentação? Jeroen, tá aí?
Estou
Are you
aqui.
there? Ah, sim. Do you have a presentation?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. But the thing is, I was talking, but nobody was listening. So.
Oh, okay. Now
I have a presentation. Actually, it's a live demonstration in this case of grip. And I will use the share screen as well to show this.
Okay. Do you know how to do that?
Yes, thank you. It was up here, right?
Yeah. The 3 dots.
The 3 dots permit the. Okay.
Podia já fazer.
Ele tem que compartilhar a tela.
Então, mesmo.
Você vai passar de novo? Ele tem que compartilhar a tela. Compartilhando a minha.
Eu sei, eu tô fazendo isso, ó. Now you accept the... Do you have a...
Let me see.
You have to accept my...
Ai. Ele tá...
Okay, I'm seeing your screen right now.
I know, I'm trying to pass the function to you.
Okay.
No web, ele não tá no aplicativo.
We think you can do that because in the web version, probably.
Okay, I had joined. Let me just check this. Okay.
Would you like us to download your presentation and show it here? Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Agora sim.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Great.
Yes. Okay, can you see a lot of birds on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. You're seeing my screen. Okay.
You don't. Can you present? Can you present yourself really quickly, and then you can go on.
Okay. I will. My name is Jeroen IJgosse. I work as a solid waste also in inclusive recycling. I'm currently as an independent consultant. I've been working with Anne in a lot of different projects with together with the organization Waste in the Netherlands, and also later in other different constellations. And we worked, for instance, together in this project in Colombia on a project which was called. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear just
Okay.
fine.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Now we don't have your presentation. Can you try and see if your presentation is... Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Okay.
I will switch to Portuguese if that's easier.
Yeah, sim.
Sim? Ok. Bom dia a todos. Vou falar a partir de agora só português, com certo sotaque em espanhol. E vou tentar apresentar lo que es o programa, lo que se llama GRIP, que es Recycling Information Platform, que foi criado dentro de um projeto que nós fizemos na Colômbia para fortalecer o sistema de informação para, por um lado, para os catadores, mas, na verdade, pode ser usado a nível mais amplo. Vou usar como ponto de partida também 2 slides que a Anne apresentou. Vocês estão vendo o New Chain Recycling Framework? Ok, obrigado. O sistema como a Anne explicou, que dentro das diferentes cadeias tem vários passos. E cada um desses passos normalmente estão identificados como a transação do material de um lado para um próximo passo. E, por exemplo, como ela falou, no junk shop, que pode ser um galpão de uma cooperativa, elas compram materiais dos catadores e logo elas vendem esses materiais a um processador, um próximo agente dentro da cadeia. E nesse caso, o que se encontrou que dentro do sistema de reciclagem, uma das coisas que a vezes dificulta é o acesso à informação, ou mais bem a disponibilidade de informação. Então, o projeto, nesse caso, a Marca Colômbia, procurou criar um instrumento que facilitou registrar a informação e facilitar o análise desta mesma informação. E a informação que está dentro da cadeia. Essa informação se basa em dois pilares. Ok, só para entender, esse horário é o horário do Brasil, certo? De São Paulo. Ok. Pois em Manaus estamos uma hora antes. Ok. Então eu vou ter uns 20 minutos agora para explicar. Vou usar este slide antes de entrar dentro o programa mesmo para mostrar como funciona. O programa, se criou um programa, uma plataforma que está baseada em web-based para que se pode registrar informação a diferentes níveis. E essa informação está disponível a nível dia a dia, informação em vivo, ou seja, informação que nós registramos neste momento será disponível, será de uma vez atualizado e forma parte não somente a nível onde você registra, por exemplo, a nível do galpão, mas também a nível do país, ou a nível um nível maior, que pode ser a nível da prefeitura ou pode ser um nível da região. Então, nesse caso, o sistema permite criar usuários por cada uma dessas entidades, seja um galpão, seja um aterro sanitário, seja uma indústria final que recebe material, e por cada um desses usuários você pode registrar a informação, as transações que são de entrada e também transações que são de saída. E com transação se entende que, neste caso, o material, que pode ser material misto, pode ser material já embalado, pode ser material triturado ou pode ser só material solta. Este material é pesado, ou seja, tem um balanço neste lugar, tem um registro de um peso e tem um registro do material específico. Essas são as duas bases fundamentais do sistema. Adicionalmente, você pode agregar o que se chama o preço, caso que você quiser, ou pode agregar muito outro tipo de informação adicional a essa específica transação. Você pode agregar, por exemplo, que essa transação vem de um específico área de uma cidade, ou você pode agregar que isso vem de uma específica cooperativa, específica organização de catadores, pode variar. Então, agora vou entrar no sistema para que vocês podem ver como funciona. Me estão escutando? Obrigado. Se creo, o programa ainda se chama Mar Colômbia neste caso, porque vamos entrar no que é o site do projeto. O programa neste caso está em espanhol, porque foi dentro da Colômbia, mas o menu mesmo pode ser também todo desenvolvido em inglês ou pode ser em outros idiomas também, pode ser em português. Essa é a entrada da plataforma. Neste caso, você vai entrar como um usuário específico. A nível nacional, você vai ser como administrador da plataforma. Você vai ser assinado um número de usuário com um password. E você pode entrar, neste caso, como, por exemplo, um administrador de um junk shop. Ou pode ser, como dizem em português, em Brasil, uma bodega, não é uma bodega, um galpão. Por exemplo, um galpão de uma associação, pode ser um galpão de uma cooperativa. Na verdade, tanto faz. Então, mas nesse caso, vou entrar como um galpão, e que foi, nesse caso, um galpão criado como prova. Dentro do mesmo Colômbia, o projeto foi desenvolvido com usuários reais. O programa foi desenvolvido, neste caso, com umas 10 associações cooperativas, que cada um tinha seu próprio galpão, e cada um delas usaram o mesmo sistema e elas ativamente foram envolvidas em desenvolver o sistema ou plataforma. Então, agora vamos entrar dentro da plataforma.
Pessoal, a conexão do Jeroen tá com dificuldade, mas vamos aguardar. Jeroen?
Ele estava ali, não.
Não, mas eu achava que tinha aqui. Essa parte. Jeroen, you there? You have to unmute your microphone. Because you... A gente tem o...
Agora a Catadores está compartilhando.
Então, sim, mas a gente tem o controle do áudio.
Sim, deveria estar aí.
Me estão escutando de novo? É que a conexão se caiu por um momentinho.
Sim.
Ok, desculpa aí. Agora eu entrei, estou explicando que estava entrando dentro da plataforma, certo? Ok. Me confirma? Alguém, por favor, que está nos escutando?
Sim, estamos escutando.
Ok, perfeito. Então, nesse momento eu entrei dentro, me estão vendo a tela? Me confirma, por favor, que estão vendo a tela do computador. Sim, obrigado, Matheus. Então, nesse momento entramos dentro da plataforma e que estou dentro dela como usuário de uma bodega. E essa bodega, a ver, essa bodega, neste momento, está... é uma bodega fictícia que está localizada em Bogotá e está vinculada, neste caso, por exemplo, à prefeitura de Medellín e tem uma certa informação base desta bodega. Esto é o que você está vendo aqui, essa página principal do usuário da bodega. Somente o bodega pode ter acesso a esta página. É a mesma bodega que define da informação que está registrada, qual parte dessa informação será compartilhada a outros usuários, seja a uma prefeitura, ou seja a nível nacional. E de que forma? Tem um menu que permite ser 3 tipos de atividades principais. Por um lado, tem um conjunto de funções que está relacionado a insertar, criar transações relacionadas ao registro de peso de específicos tipos de materiais. Logo, você pode reportar e fazer análise dessa informação que foi registrada. E, finalmente, teremos aqui uns 5 funções que são mais que tudo relacionadas à administração de listas de base que se precisa para poder registrar. Uma dessas principais é o que é a lista de materiais. O sistema estava o registro de diferentes tipos de materiais. Neste caso, em Colômbia, se criou uns 100 diferentes tipos de materiais que foi baseado dentro da experiência, dentro das bodegas, dentro dos galpões que operam a nível nacional. Umas coisas que se encontrou que, efetivamente, que se usam diferentes termos em diferentes partes do país, inclusive pode ser dentro da mesma cidade. Então, o que se fez é o seguinte, se criou aqui um nome global que indica que esse é um nome que se usa por todo lado, mas você pode, dentro de uma específica cidade, dentro de um específico usuário, você pode mudar esse nome específico e você pode dar um nome representativo por o que você usa dentro da sua cidade. Então, isso implica que, por exemplo, alguém que está usando o material, ou registrando o material dentro de São Paulo, e dá para alumínio de um específico tipo de alumínio um nome, mas é o mesmo tipo de material que se usa em Manaus, mas com outro nome em Manaus, cada um pode registrar em seu próprio galpão, mas a nível nacional, em caso de compartilhar a informação, se soma esses 2 tipos de materiais. Esta lista de materiais é dado e administrado a nível nacional para adicionar ou tirar nomes de materiais somente a nível nacional. O administrador do programa a nível nacional pode fazer isso. Logo, vamos ver uma coisa importante, o que se chama recicladores. Para poder vincular uma transação a uma pessoa ou uma entidade que está entregando o material, nesse caso, material de entrada, para registrar uma transação de entrada, você precisa criar um certo número de pessoas ou entidades a qual você pode vincular. Por exemplo, você precisa, em caso que você tenha catadores que estão como foi neste caso, você tem um conjunto de catadores que sempre estão entregando material a lo que é o junk shop, você tem que registrar esses números dessas pessoas, porque logo o peso do material que as pessoas estão entregando ao junk shop. Então, você pode ver aqui, tem um reciclador Pedro, e você pode ver que tipo de informações a relacionar a essa pessoa. O mais importante é que você tenha um nome de identificação. O resto pode ser opcional. Logo, um tema importante também é o que são, você pode identificar diferentes áreas de trabalho. Você criar, por exemplo, uma área que seja, nesta casa, por exemplo, uma área de trabalho que se chama montanha, pode ser uma área dentro de um específico cidade, e logo, esta permite que, neste caso, você pode vincular material que chegou ao galpão a um específico origem. Esta origem pode ser uma área de serviço, pode ser, por exemplo, que isto por um dia específico, ou pode ser que isto foi designado a, por exemplo, um cliente, um fonte específico, pode ser um supermercado, pode ser uma indústria, que sempre produz muitas embalagens, na qual o catador foi procurar. Então, te permite criar como rutas específicas. Você pode criar uma lista específica de base. E vamos ver agora como isso funciona e de que forma você pode usar essa para registrar a informação. Agora vamos a lo que é o registro de informação mesmo. Isso pode acontecer vivo, como estamos fazendo, ou pode ser que você faz isso, por exemplo, que você tem anotado a nível de papel primeiro, as transações, e logo uma vez à semana, você vai entrar dentro o internet, e você, dentro da plataforma, e você registra a informação. Dois pontos principais. Um é que uma transação de entrada seja dentro da parte da cadeia. Vamos ver a bodega. A transação de entrada é o que grava. Ou é o que neste caso a junk shop vende ao professor falou essas 25 toneladas que foram, por exemplo, de um específico material já ao processador. Porque dentro do que é o galpão já se tinha um certo processo de separar e de dar um certo valor agregado, seja através de embalar, ou de tirar etiquetas, ou inclusive de limpar. Esse termo pode ser analisado também, e por isso, se quer fazer isso, pode usar uma opção que se chama classificador. Mas vamos enfocar primeiro, neste momento, no que é transação de entrada. Só para confirmar, me estão escutando bem? Estão vendo bem?
Sim, Jeroen.
Obrigado. Obrigado. Obrigado, Matheus. Obrigado, Natália, em Madeira. Vamos à transação de entrada. Neste caso, enfocamos primeiro no que chama da lista do reciclador, que o nome foi dado reciclador, mas na verdade pode ser também outro. Por exemplo, o mesmo galpão tem contratos com específicos fontes de materiais, pode colocar aqui esses nomes de fontes de materiais. Pode ser, por exemplo, Carrefour, ou pode colocar Banco do Brasil. Então, por exemplo, você já sabe que o Banco do Brasil recebe este material. Logo, eu posso procurar os recicladores que já estão aí. Ou, neste momento, eu não posso criar um novo aqui. Para criar uma nova pessoa de entrada que ingressa material, tem que ir à lista de materiais, a lista de recicladores, para fazer esta nova pessoa. Só posso trabalhar aqui com pessoas ou entidades que estão registradas. Vamos criar, colocar aqui o nome da pessoa, toda a informação adicional que já tinha registrado aparece. Logo, eu posso colocar aqui a data, pode ser a data de hoje, ou em caso, por exemplo, que estou hoje em dia, registrando, insertando toda a informação desta semana, posso dizer, não, esta foi da segunda-feira, e segunda-feira vamos registrar que essa pessoa, que material ingressou segunda-feira. Aqui posso, se querer, colocar, certo, essa pessoa está trabalhando onde? Na montanha, e foi trabalhar o dia da ruta de martes, que é da terça-feira. Então, agora vamos iniciar o que é o registro da transação mesmo, o registro dos materiais. E toda esta material que vamos registrar agora está vinculado ao reciclador Pedro, que o dia 19 de junho estava trabalhando em lo que é a área, a montanha, em lo que nós estamos chamando a rota de martes ou de terça-feira. Aqui podemos ver que é o reciclador Pedro. E, na verdade, a outra informação que colocamos em cima ainda está aí, somente foi. Ok, thank you. Só vou mostrar como se está aí logo para ver a informação. Vou mostrar agora como se registra a informação. Que, por exemplo, se chegou alumínio, que foi de 100 quilos, e já tinha um preço fixo. Então, posso salvar essa informação e logo também chega o papel, cartão, que são 200 quilos. Como você vê, aqui está o código de transação, que é único, que está em base de dados. E logo eu posso ver em reportar sobre essa informação que eu acabo de registrar. Vamos, por exemplo, a lo que é reportar. Desta semana 25, acabamos de registrar esta informação. Lo que é perfil, alumínio perfil. E esta posso exportar, em caso, posso usar esta informação aqui, ou posso exportar a Excel. E em Excel aparece essa total, que posso usar. Ou posso também, em caso de criar um informe por pessoa específico, posso ir a Pedro, que também hoje em dia registrou a informação, e aumento de exportar esta informação a Excel. Toda a informação que eu registrei, você vê no transação, o horário em qual isto foi incluído, e toda a informação que está de Pedro vai ser incluída aqui. E logo eu posso usar a informação, exportar em Excel, posso usar dentro do meu próprio sistema administrativo que tenho dentro a bodega, por exemplo, ou dentro do galpão. Deixe-me só terminar para mostrar um aspecto do que é uma função de filtro que se criou. Para reportar, criamos três diferentes formas de criar informação. Por um lado, é reportar a nível geral. Por outro lado, o que é você pode dizer um balanço de massa. Período específico, neste caso, é entrada, saída, por exemplo, podemos ver em junho. Neste mês de junho, você pode ver que entrou o peso do material que entrou, porque, na verdade, não somente foi registro hoje, mas também outros dias nesta semana, deste mês, e, por exemplo, o peso do material que saiu. Então, você pode ver da bodega, ok, como foi o movimento, por exemplo, nesta bodega, ou este galpão, galpão desta cooperativa. E, o último, vou mostrar aqui, você também pode gerar informes por campo, que te permite fazer um certo filtro, em qual, neste momento, está criadas as opções. Você pode, por exemplo, filtrar por tipo de material, Então, você pode ver, por exemplo, no mês de junho, que foi o alumínio perfil, o movimento dela. Então, você vê o total do alumínio do mês. Ou você pode dizer, eu vejo a área da montanha que foi movimentada neste mês na área da montanha. Lembrando que, neste caso, isso pode ser ingressado por diferentes catadores. Aqui você não veja qual catador entregou este material. O que você veja, por exemplo, que é na área da montanha, que é na área específica dentro da cidade, foi gerou esse tipo de material que entrou neste galpão ou nesta bodega. Então, como eu falei, isso permite que, só para finalizar, o instrumento permite que você pode, a nível do junk shop, criar informação. O junk shop, que te permite fazer da bodega ou do galpão. Então, por exemplo, o mesmo cooperativa pode usar para, sei lá, a administração de pagar as captadoras que estão dando material, ou em caso que ela mesmo, o galpão tem diferentes contratos de coleta seletiva com a prefeitura, pode usar este mesmo sistema para registrar e controlar o movimento do material. Mas também a nível da cidade, em caso que tenha mais que uma prefeitura usando esse sistema, você pode ver que, efetivamente, esses galpões estão vinculados. Então, a nível, somente para mostrar, para finalizar, vou entrar agora a nível nacional. Agora estou entrando como administrador a nível nacional, que também permite ter informação a nível nacional. Então, eu posso ver, neste caso, como foi o movimento, por exemplo, de diferentes bodegas. Neste momento estão, mas pode ser feito de tal forma que isto fica anônimo. Então, a nível nacional, você vê aqui todos que estão, neste caso, registrando informação. Por exemplo, que é bodega teste. Bodega teste nesta semana gerou esta informação. Então, a nível nacional, tem acesso a esta informação. Esta, então, permite também, a nível de um município, de uma prefeitura, você pode ver, por exemplo, quantas bodegas estão você pode ver quanto material está sendo recuperado dentro a cidade ou dentro da sua própria prefeitura. Em caso que tem pessoa interessada em ver mais em detalhe ou como funciona o programa, podemos facilitar também o uso para que vocês possam ter acesso ao programa e se pode criar um usuário de teste. E se pode dar uma explicação um pouco mais detalhada também. E temos manuais de instruções para usuários também. E com isso eu quero fechar a apresentação da plataforma, para dar também a oportunidade a atender perguntas que existem para a apresentação da Anne.
Legal.
Então, eu devolvo a palavra para você.
Legal, Jeroen, muito obrigada. A gente gostou bastante de ver o demonstrativo da plataforma. E agora a gente vai abrir para perguntas, pessoal. Vocês podem escrever no chat ou também a gente pode liberar o áudio se vocês preferirem. Mas escrevam no chat que acho que fica melhor. tanto para Anne quanto para o Jeroen. Alguém quer começar? Então a gente vai começar, já que ninguém se iniciou. I have a question for Anne. Anne, can you hear us? Ok, Matheus, já vi sua pergunta. And if you can start starting your audio, we're going to go to a question from Matheus to Jeroen. Jeroen, Matheus está perguntando qual é a adesão das organizações de catadores desse sistema na Colômbia. Quantas organizações já tem esse sistema? Jeroen? Can you hear us, Jeroen? Eu acho que o Jeroen, ele caiu de novo. You can hear us? Okay, so Matheus is asking how many organizations of waste pickers in Colombia they are actually going to the system, to the platform. How successful has it been? No, we can't hear you. Oh, not yet. Oh, no. I thought. Apparently we have I am muted. Oh, wait, just one moment.
Todo mundo?
Ele falou assim que não consegue.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, and I can hear, I guess I can hear me also.
Okay. Bom dia, me pode escutar agora?
Sim.
Okay. I will, okay, perfect. Is it okay if I answer this in English?
Yes.
Okay. In this case, the question was by Matheus is how many catadores, organizaciones catadores are using the system right now in Colombia, right?
Yes.
Okay. The system was developed together with about 10 different organizations, and they during the development phase, it was actually they were using the system at that time. The information was live information. It was for their own use at that time as well. So they were able to use the different functions of the system. One of the after the system was developed, the main challenge, one of the challenges was to actually make sure who would, and the questions that needed to be answered was who would actually operate the system at national level afterwards. So the project that we worked on focused on this issue as well, in this element in a parallel time as well, in a parallel way at the same time. And the Ministry of Housing in Colombia, who is responsible for solid waste management and the integration of inclusion of recyclers, they adopted the platform, the system, and they are currently now involved in rolling this out at a national level. So that means I wouldn't be able to, currently I can't answer actually how many organizations are using it in Colombia, other than the 10 organizations which were using it during the, as we can say, I suppose say, the test phase, which was the test phase for development of the platform. However, as indicated, during that same period, for them it was not as such a test. They were using the real information, so they could their information could be used. They had access to their own information, and they could use their own information during that period of about a year, 1.5 years. Matthias, that answers the question. Okay. And maybe you want to add something there?
The only thing I would add about that is that what the government of Colombia is using now is called ONRI, the Observatorio Nacional for Reciclaje Inclusivo. They have their own exclusive license to that, and we created some additional functionalities for them and migrated the platform to Oracle because they have a national requirement that all their software systems use Oracle. They're having a little bit of trouble with finding quality programmers to do the hosting. But we think this is all sort of beginning errors. But one of the results of that is that neither Jeroen nor I nor our third partner, Patty, is daily in contact with them in Colombia. So we think that about 10 organizations that we're piloting may be just continuing to use the platform because it serves their uses. But in terms of new users and the functionality in the ONRI system, we don't actually know.
And maybe, Matthias, just your second part of the question was what kind of training was given, and maybe that I would link that to what Anne was saying as well. The training aspect was crucial, and not only training but coaching and permanent
help desk.
Permanent feedback and accompanying them during the process. What was done was actually a two-level step. One is to have a general explanation to the persons that were making the decisions within the association or the cooperative, so that they would understand what would be the use, what would be the purpose of the platform, and they then would assign or indicate who would be internally the person normally responsible for the administration and who would actually be operating the system. And that could vary. Sometimes the Galpon would already have a person that would be using different type of using other administrative systems like Excel, or they might be using already a certain level of automation. But in other cases, this was very limited. So for us, that was also important that the training was focused on all those different types of levels. The training was done always initially on site. So basically that meant in the Galpon, sit there with the person that will be responsible for the administration, which normally would not be one of the persons working sorting waste or sorting materials, but normally would be an administrative person. But that person would know very well how the operation worked internally, and then show the person, as we did now, how the system works. Instructions were provided as well and given, a PowerPoint presentation type of instructions, which goes step by step through all the different functions. And then after that session, which would last maybe, I don't know, half a day, say, they would start working with it, and they would be able to have feedback on they could call us, they could write us, and what we had actually, that we had a person, in this case in Bogota, he would call every week, or during a week, he would always call all the different associations and ask them how they were progressing, and they would then come up with specific questions, and we would bundle them together, and then we would check whether the issues were like bugs which were in the system, or whether there was something which actually they were saying, okay, we would like to add a specific type of material, or we would like to add a specific type of function. That was a process in which the organizations that were using it as a pilot were very active, and the final product is that stands right now is derived from that. It has integrated, there where possible, those wishes and those realities from the situation in Colombia. But in case this would need to be used in Brazil, apart from the language issue, you would also maybe have to analyze if work processes are the same, and as such, in case there are differences, whether certain functionalities might need to be changed.
While you're still talking about the platform, we have a question. Actually, Mayara has a question for you. She wants to know if the platform, it also helps with the commercial transactions, or it's only for data reporting. Can you?
No.
I can answer that a little bit first, and then Jeroen can come in. The first thing is that there are lots of sort of latent functionalities, and one or more of the bodegas, they actually wanted to use it for their administration and for their invoicing systems. But it can work on a number of commercial levels. One is that it's prepared so that it can also like look up global prices and check whether the prices that are being offered in Brazil at the moment, how much they differ from global prices. The basic structure is there to do that, but it costs a little bit more additional specific programming, and also to make the link to the global prices sources. But you can, one of the things that I don't speak Portuguese, so I wasn't following Jeroen's presentation entirely, is that by an outgoing transaction, you actually specify what the truck is and what it's carrying and where it's going. And if it doesn't arrive, you can get like a flag that says, hey, you have unfinished transactions from these vehicles because they never arrived at the place they were going. So that's the kind of function that I guess you might mean by sort of commercially interesting function.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe just to expand upon that, the system, there's two levels important within the system. There's certain information which you have to put in there obligatory. It's called compulsory, and which always will be registered. That is type of material, the weight of that material, and who or what brings that material to the point of registration, which could be like the galpon, and what or who takes that material out of it's like the transaction, which is the outgoing transaction. That information, which is important, the material and the weight, that information is obligatory in the system. All the other information related to prices or to costs of specific materials can be added, and the system allows for it to be added, but doesn't need the system doesn't need that in order to operate. Why is that important? Because certain one of the things that we found was that there were that the issue of registering the amount that you're paying for a specific material or the amount that you're receiving for material is very sensitive, and the issue of deciding whether that information you want to share or not is an issue of debate and was something which has to be taken into account when designing the system.
Okay.
But yes, the system can allow for certain administrative functions, and we created also different fields which allow you to put an invoice number, or even different types of invoice numbers related to the legal tax system, in this case in Colombia. And what is important as well, as Anne explained, the system is linked to the next phase. So remember that your junk shop might be selling something to the paper industry. The system allows for that the paper industry can actually, so let's say that the junk shop, a truck with a specific license plate is leaving with 10 tons. It will arrive at the paper industry, and the paper industry can see, okay, this truck with this license plate is coming into our weighing scale, and it can register that specific truck with that specific material, and it will know that it has come from that junk shop.
Yeah.
And as such, and if an agreement is, well, this is actually 10 tons and this is the quality that we want to pay, then they will confirm, and that information will be confirmed at the junk shop level as well.
No.
The system allows for that interaction. However, the system is also built, the platform is built in such a way that not all those users need to be using the system. So in this case, for instance, let's say that the paper industry still is not using yet the platform. The bodega can still, or the galpon can still register it as an outgoing transaction, that it has sold the specific paper, and as such can use it internally for its own process.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We go now a question for Anne that Matteo has. He wants to know, how can we create spaces in public policy to decentralize the models that are now here in Brazil? We have private service providers and the urban cleaning, right? And we want to shift or decentralize this model to higher organizations of waste. So how can we create this in public policy in order to make it happen?
Can you tell me what the current system looks like a little bit? I know about some places, but when you say the system in Brazil makes space, can you describe the system in which he would like to make some space?
Municipality hires one service provider to do things, mixed waste and also recycling for collection. But for example, here in college, there is two companies who do that, and what we're trying to do, or what we want is centralized. We're trying to make the municipalities to hire organizations of waste service providers. Is that clear?
Natalia, you're too far from the microphone. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Almost.
That most of the municipalities, they hire few companies, one or two companies to do waste management. And what we want is, what we're trying to create, is that the organizations of waste pickers, they are hired by municipalities. So how can we do this in the public policy? What could be one of the strategies?
I get it. I would say one of the most important things you can do is in how the waste management companies get paid. They should, in order to make the space, they need to be paid by the number of households they serve and not by the number of tons they collect. Because if they are paid by the number of tons they collect, then they are going to try to sabotage recycling because it takes their money away. And if they are going to pay paid by the household, but they then have to pay for disposal, that will give them an incentive to cooperate with informal recyclers or with anybody doing the recycling, because they still get paid per household for stopping there on the route to take the waste, but what they actually pick up is less, and so they use less fuel to go to the disposal site, and they have to pay less for disposal. So that's an important policy point, is the service sector, management sector, should get their money by the number of households or apartments or dwelling units or businesses that they serve, and not by the amount of waste that they collect. Is that clear?
Yes, it's very clear. Talvez, I think so, Anne. I think this is clear enough. I took some notes, so we have.
There are other things, because one is that sometimes the privatization rules are, there are lots of things you can do with the privatization rules in the policy that make spaces. One is you can separate the recycling collection from the waste collection, or you can say that every waste collection company, if they are not collecting the recyclables themselves, that they have to hire informal recyclers to do the collection for them. Or you can also say it's not even allowed to collect mixed waste anymore. They have to facilitate getting the recyclables out. Or another thing that you can do is you can make the landfill fees, make the disposal fees more expensive. And the more expensive the disposal fees become, the more spaces for other things that are less expensive than the disposal to kind of flourish or bloom in the system. Because as long as disposal is low priced, there's not a good financial reason
Anne?
Hello, Anne? She's gone.
Esperar um minutinho, mas a gente já passou 15 minutos, né? A gente entende. Tem que tudo bem, né, Má?
Sim.
A gente agradece a participação de todo mundo.
E se tiverem perguntas também que quiserem fazer para responder, e o Jeroen, vocês
Sim.
podem mandar por e-mail e a gente repassa para eles, enfim, a resposta pode vir outro dia que não hoje, tá bom? Fiquem à vontade. O e-mail é o mesmo, maiara@giral.com.br. Acho que é isso, né? É isso. Não. Não.
Você pode usar, na verdade, pode usar os 2 e-mails que está dentro do CC.
Isso. Tá bom.
Sim, pode usar esses 2 mesmo, tanto da Anne, bom, Anne usa às vezes diferentes, mas pode usar, se ela coloca isso, esse é o e-mail que ela vai responder. E o meu é o Gmail.
Exato. Fiquem atentos aí, como eu disse no começo do webinário, nas nossas redes sociais. Temos 2 programados aí, um em setembro e um em dezembro. O tema ainda não está definido, mas assim que for definido e o convidado também, a gente passa o recado. Fiquem atentos e de repente pode até haver algum webinário surpresa aí que não esses programados, tá bom? Obrigada, pessoal. Tenham um bom dia e até a próxima.
Obrigado. Você vai tomar contato com a Anne agora, não?
Sim, a gente vai. Se tiverem mais perguntas, a gente tem algumas também que a gente vai mandar para ela e assim que tiver alguma resposta, a gente
Eu sei, mas
repassa.
acho que ela foi cortada, não sei porquê, mas porque ela sabe que já terminou, por isso. Ela acha, não sei se ela está consciente disso.
Não, estranho, não sou, a gente não.
Eu vou falar com o Skype com ela para confirmar isso, ok?
Obrigada.
Ela está dizendo que ela não está escutando nada, ela está dizendo.
A gente tem que terminar com o horário e depois a gente manda as perguntas para ela. Obrigada, pessoal.
Ela quer agradecer, não?
Can you hear us, Anne?
I can hear you, but I don't know if she can.
Yes. I don't know.
Se não tenta se ela está no Skype, pode ser que ela está.
Okay, I'll send her the questions and a special thanks by email.
Okay, perfect.
Keep in contact to future opportunities to collaborate. Okay, Jeroen?
Perfect, sounds good. And
All right.
okay, and if anyone would be interested in seeing how the platform works and have a bit more time to explain, that's perfect as well.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Okay, cheers, bye.
Obrigada. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Até logo.
Até.
Bye.
Virei Maia. Peraí, Nath, não terminei.